Welcome to Conversations About Construction. I'm Dave Trafford. This podcast is produced and presented by the Residential and Civil Construction Alliance of Ontario. Members of the Alliance build your homes. They build your transportation networks and the systems that deliver safe, clean drinking water to your kitchen sink. This series will focus on industry innovations and solutions that support sustainable economic development and Ontario's world-class standard of living. In this episode, keeping tons of reusable concrete and asphalt out of landfill. Our guests for this episode are Rob Bradford, he's with the Toronto and Area Road Builders Association, and Kyle Martin, a project manager at Fermar Paving. So it's not one of the things that would have occurred to me as being an issue or a problem, but I gather the more I read about this that there is a need to be paying more attention to recycled aggregate when we are building our roads and when we're doing major construction jobs. And I guess, Rob, the one thing that occurs to me is that there is capacity right now to be able to use recycled aggregate, but if that's the case, why are we not using it more?
It is a recycled product. It has to be processed to specification, and if done so, it's absolutely as good as virgin aggregate. However, there's some long-standing, deep-rooted feelings by, I think, many municipal engineers and consulting engineers that may have had a problem in the past with recycled aggregate that maybe didn't quite meet specification. Those kinds of experiences carry forward and kind of preclude them ever considering using recycled aggregate. It's safer, it's easier to go with the virgin aggregate option than to, in their minds, take a chance and use a recycled aggregate.
I guess, Kyle, then the question would be, what kind of chance are they taking? If the quality is good, then what are we worried about?
Yeah, it's just the unknown, especially in the environment we live in here in Canada. The freeze-thaw cycles obviously can cause some damage to the roads. And there's not a huge gap in the price difference between recycled and virgin aggregate. So to the engineers and the ones at the municipalities, the risk is it's a much greater risk than you do get return on it. So in the end, when it does break up, it's just an easy thing to point their finger at. A lot of the time, it isn't the underlying granular material that's the problem. It's what takes the blame a lot of the time.
Okay, but then that's a quality standard issue, right? Is it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a quality standard issue, and like any other construction material, I mean, any construction material can fail if it's not produced properly. Recycled aggregate is no different than any other material. The producer has to produce it properly and carefully to specification, and at the same time, the owner has to do their own quality assurance testing to assure themselves that they're getting a good product for their projects.
Well, okay, Kyle, but what makes a bad product then? Because it sounds like if it's all coming from reputable firms or going to reputable companies or contractors, where's the gap?
Yeah, so I think dialing back to what we talked about at the start of it was just why are some municipalities reluctant to use it? Because Rob's right. On the MTO and some of the biggest stages, it's being used and used very well and successfully. The issue is you get into a bunch of some smaller municipalities that have had issues with it in the past, and that comes from as much as, let's say, some drywall that gets into the rubble pile and gets crushed up. That really fine concrete dust that's in drywall causes havoc to the roads during the first freeze-thaw. So you get a few of those situations, and then they just don't want to use it anymore. They don't want to trust that the material is any good, and the pricing that they're paying for virgin material isn't that much of a gap. So until you start throwing in some of the new green initiatives that our industry is trying to use, or start pushing sustainable practices and using existing resources before depleting like the new resources, that type of culture, it's not going to get the municipalities to change their mind on it.
I could just emphasize something that Kyle touched on. He mentioned the Ministry of Transportation of Ontario, and we're suggesting they're the absolute model in this whole story. Ministry of Transportation successfully recycles roughly 20% of all of the aggregate they use is recycled aggregate, and that's kind of the level that's allowed by the specifications. And if they can do it properly, we don't see any reason why any municipality should be afraid of it.
So,
Agreed.
Okay, then walk me through this, because then there's a difference at the municipal level. Which municipalities, Rob, work better than others? I mean, I'm assuming somebody has sort of the standard that you would want everybody to have.
Yeah, well, first of all, there isn't a municipality that is recycling everything that they could. But we did an independent survey of municipalities a few years ago, looking at their usage in all types of applications, from road base to using it in new hot mix asphalt. Generally speaking, the greatest use is as roadbed under new pavement. But our study identified a number of municipalities that do the job very well. And we kind of jokingly called them the leaders as opposed to the laggards. City of Toronto came up very, very good in the survey, as well as municipalities like Cambridge, Markham, Kitchener did well, York Region did well. But at the bottom of the list, you've got municipalities that use virtually no recycled aggregate as a matter of policy. And they include, the worst offenders are Mississauga, Oshawa, Peel Region, Durham Region. Those are the municipalities that just need to get on the ball and get behind this thing.
So bring this down to eye level for me, because two things I want to ask you then. If we're not recycling this pavement and the asphalt, where is it going?
Right now, you got over 3 million tons of it stocked up in contractors' yards, and that's traditionally where we've been storing it. But we've reached a point, and that's why our association is so eager to promote this stuff. We can't take any more in our yards. They're loaded to capacity, so they go to landfill after that. I mean, we're throwing in the garbage 100% recyclable material. That to me, that's unacceptable in this green world where, you and I sit and pick banana peels out of our green bin to put into our blue bin, and we've got millions and millions of tons of stones going to landfill as garbage. That doesn't speak to any nature of environmental commitment from the municipalities, in my opinion.
Now, Kyle mentioned off the top there in terms of the cost differential over the course of a year given a municipality. Is that what kind of dollar and cents difference does that make, though? I mean, eventually we're going to get a gap, and that dollar figure must be fairly significant.
Yeah, I would say that you probably depends on the size of the municipality, but you're into tens of millions of dollars depending upon the amount of aggregate they're using, for sure.
So that would be tens of millions of dollars that they are spending that they don't have to spend. Is that what you're suggesting?
They could save money, but I don't think we're saying they save tens of millions of dollars a year, unless I'm wrong.
No, that's the amount of aggregate they use. So if you're talking, they say it's a $3 or $4 difference. But once you start throwing in the trucking and trucking it in from up north versus trucking it to local establishments, and you're into some significant increases or differences in the delta between that. So
I think there's always a cost saving, but that's not the way you sell this thing, because it costs money to produce recycled aggregate. You certainly save money from long distance hauling. Transportation is about 60% of the cost of aggregate. So if you can have it available closer to where you need it and not bring it in from 100 kilometers away, yeah, there's a cost saving. But I don't think that should be the main kicker for the municipality. I think the real imperative here is to not be part of a system that throws away valuable renewable resources.
Why has it been so tough to kind of crack this nut? I mean, getting past the idea that somebody might be fussy Rob around, a one bad experience. Surely you can see past that if there's real economic and environmental benefit.
I don't know, but, and I'll be very, very frank about this, but imagine yourself as a consulting engineer who's paid by the owner or the owner's own engineer who has to deliver a job at the end that everybody's happy with. Now, he's got a choice, and he says, I can use virgin aggregate, and then the aggregate will never be an issue. Or I can use recycled aggregate, and if something happens on this job, that's what people are going to point at, and I'm the guy that made the decision, and now my head's, on the chopping block. Why don't I just avoid that altogether by staying away from it? I think that's kind of the thought process.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head there. I think there's that fear of the buck stops with that person, and there's not a large enough delta in price for them to take that risk.
Okay, but I guess at some point there must be evidence-based decisions made as well to say, over the course of so many projects going on over so many years, you could probably point what's the margin of error there in terms of the when you do use recycled aggregate where you do have a problem. It must be fairly low.
Well, you're preaching to the choir, Dave. That's exactly our opinion. I mean, show us what you're concerned about. And, many times when a municipality has a project that doesn't go quite the way they wanted to, I mean, you can point a finger at recycled aggregate, but that's not necessarily what caused it. There's all kinds of things that can cause a pavement not to turn out to be what was originally planned. Every part of the process requires due diligence, a professional contractor working on it. To me, it's a no-brainer, and I don't understand why we haven't got city councils that say, why aren't we doing this?
Well, let me put it to you then, Kyle, because, you're the guy putting the pavement on the road. Based on your own experience, how often does it happen where you're using recycled aggregate that you can point to it and say, okay, that was a bad decision, or that's the problem that we're now dealing with 12 months, 18 months from now?
Yeah, from where we're standing, it's very seldom that you can trace it right to that. I'm not going to lie to you. Before the Auditor's General reports, were there people being a little more liberal with trying to increase that 20% recycled to 25 or 30% and ran into some issues? Absolutely. The biggest issue that I think we're having as contractors, speaking from the contractor side of it right now, is getting the municipalities to call it own the material. The ministry on all their jobs, they need bill of ladings. They want to know where that material is being trucked, and a lot of the times our sites are where it's going. The municipalities don't track it. If it was their responsibility to own where that pavement went, they would certainly be promoting the recycled angle a lot more than they are. So a company like Mississauga or Durham Region, if you had to tell them that they had to find a spot or a home for 100,000 ton of recycled asphalt coming off the road, they would certainly promote trying to get some of that going back into it as well. And that's what hasn't happened yet on the contract side. So
then, Rob, do we need the province to kind of regulate this and say, okay, everybody's, bang their heads together until they pay attention, or what's going on?
Well, this is one of the avenues that we're taking. We're in the midst of producing some technical information so that we know that isn't an issue, and we want to talk to the provincial government about how do we go about getting municipalities up to that 20% level. And I know traditionally in Ontario, provincial governments don't like to and don't often dictate to municipalities. But in this case, I'm kind of thinking it's probably not a bad idea if the provincial government could find some sort of mechanism to say, you know what, this is the gold standard in Ontario, and we want all municipalities at that level.
Well, it sounds like this requires further conversation. So, but you guys have done such a great job. You've made me understand it. So I think that's a major step forward here. Rob Bradford and Kyle Martin, thanks for being here. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Good talking to you, folks. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Rob.
Thanks to Kyle Martin and Rob Bradford for being our guest today. You've been listening to Conversations About Construction, and we'd encourage you to subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts and share it with your network. Conversations About Construction is produced for the Residential and Civil Construction Alliance of Ontario by iContact Productions. I'm Dave Trafford.